Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking our first look at Intel's new 12th gen Alder Lake mobile processors, starting with the Core i7-12700H. Normally I would have started with the Core i9-12900HK like a lot of other reviewers, but thanks to FedEx stuffing us around with shipping, we're looking at the Core i7 today instead. As we've talked about in our Alder Lake desktop reviews, this new generation of CPUs is Intel's first serious step into the world of hybrid architectures, combining a new high-performance CPU architecture, Golden Cove performance cores, with smaller Gracemont efficient cores for better performance and better performance per watt. While this hybrid approach has been reasonably effective on the desktop, the dual architecture approach should really come alive in constrained form factors like laptops, where power consumption and efficiency are key. Alder Lake H series for high-performance laptops also brings a range of new platform advantages, including DDR5 support, a beefier Xe integrated GPU, and other connectivity improvements. Intel claims these new processors should be the fastest ever seen for mobile computing, and we'll of course be exploring that later in our benchmarks. The Core i7-12700H we're looking at today is going to be the most widely used chip in Intel's lineup, like the Core i7-11800H and Core i7-10750H before it, slotting right into a huge range of mid and upper mid-range gaming and productivity systems. It packs 6 P cores and 8 E cores for a total of 20 processor threads, along with 24 meg of L3 cache and a 96 execution unit GPU. The P cores are clocked at 2.3 GHz base and 4.7 GHz boost, while the E cores get a 1.7 GHz base and 3.5 GHz boost clock. Like prior Intel products, the default TDP for this chip is 45 watts, though many laptop OEMs will have modes to enable higher long-term power limits. What makes the 12700H quite a compelling processor is it's the lowest chip in the stack that still provides the full complement of CPU cores found in Intel's H series die. The 12800H, 12900H, and 12900HK that sit above it are essentially just clock speed improvements, and in past generations, simple clock speed bumps haven't been a great value proposition for buyers. We'll be checking out the 12900HK soon, but the 12700H could be hitting that value sweet spot. Our test platforms for today were kindly provided by XMG and their partner Uniwil. The two designs we have on hand for testing should be widely used across various OEMs. I'm not sure if these specific ones will become XMG products, but other companies like Electronics and so on also use these sorts of laptops, and you should see them available for sale soon. The GM7A-G8M 17-inch chassis includes the Core i7-12700H and new NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 Ti laptop graphics at 150 watts. The smaller GM5A-G7Y 15-inch model also packs the Core i7-12700H, but this time a GeForce RTX 3070 Ti laptop GPU at 125 watts. We'll be testing out these GPUs in a later video. Both models also pack 1440p high refresh displays and 32GB of DDR5 4800 memory in a 2-stick configuration. If you want to learn more about XMG's lineup and what they are offering with 12th gen, there's a link in the description. Our testing today has been conducted in 2 power configurations. We've got a long-term PL1 power limit of 45 watts, Intel's default spec for these chips, as well as 75 watts, which is a common boosted power level seen across many laptop vendors. These will be compared apples to apples with other laptop chips running at the same configuration, which gives us the best look at how these CPUs compare in a fair benchmark battle. If we compared one chip at 75 watts to another at 60 watts, we'd really only be comparing which specific laptop design can send the most power to the CPU, not which CPU actually performs better, which is why we test like this. Boost PL2 power is set to Intel's default of 115 watts in both instances. Testing like this also gives you guys the most useful information that can be applied to a wide range of laptops. If you're buying a thinner and lighter system, the 45 watt numbers will be most important, while those after a beefier system with more cooling power should look at 75 watts. On to the results. We'll start here with everyone's favourite, Cinebench R23 multithreading. The Core i7-12700H is the fastest processor I've tested to date, beating all other contenders including the Ryzen 9 5900HX and Apple's M1 Pro, even when run at just 45 watts. This represents a 27% performance improvement over the Core i7-11800H, a 21% improvement on the Ryzen 7 5800H, and a 12% gain on the Ryzen 9 5900HX. It's also 8% faster than Apple Silicon here, though the M1 Pro uses a bit less power in this workload. But among the x86 pack, the 12700H does appear to be the best processor in terms of performance per watt in this workload. Intel are able to extend their lead when looking in the 75 watt power class. The 12700H is 36% faster than the 11800H here, and is now beating the Ryzen 7 5800H by 33%, up from a mid-20s improvement in the lower power class. We'll look at power scaling in more depth later, but these early results show the 12700H is able to produce a decent amount more performance when allowed to run beyond 45 watts in longer term workloads. I should note here the M1 Pro is included in our 75 watt charts for reference, but one limitation of Apple Silicon is that it can't be run above default power spec, so here it's a roughly 40 watt part up against 75 watt configurations. That's the current reality of buying a MacBook versus Windows based systems. It's a slam dunk win for Intel in the single-threaded workload. The P-cores running at up to 4.7 GHz crush Cinebench R23, beating everything in the field by a significant margin, 22% faster than the 11800H, 26% faster than the 5800H, 20% faster than the 5900HX, and a very solid 18% faster than Apple's M1 Pro. This is achieved without consuming more single-thread power than other x86 processors, though the ARM-based M1 Pro is significantly more efficient. Handbrake isn't quite as favourable for the 12700H compared to other chips when looking at X265 encoding, but the performance gain relative to older Intel parts is still quite impressive. This new CPU is 15% faster than the Core i7 11800H and holds a narrow lead on the 5800H from AMD, but can't quite match the 5900HX, losing by 4%. This is one of the tougher workloads for Alder Lake, but it still holds its own. However, at 75 watts, the 12700H is able to pull ahead of the field. While just 3% faster than the 5800H at 45 watts, it's now a very solid 22% faster, owing to Alder Lake's great scalability up to higher power levels. So if you do get a laptop with the cooling power to handle higher long-term power, the 12700H is the way to go. Blender CPU rendering is similar to the Handbrake results in that the Core i7 12700H at 45 watts sits among the pack that includes the 5900HX, 5800H and M1 Pro, while delivering a 25% performance gain over the Core i7 11800H. That's a great generation on generation improvement, however in this workload it's only able to close the existing gap between Intel, AMD and Apple. But like in Handbrake, when the 12700H is given 75 watts of juice to work with, it can accelerate beyond the other processors we've looked at to post quite an impressive score that makes this new generation well suited to CPU rendering. Code compilation is a strong point for the Core i7 12700H, enhanced through the upgrade to DDR5 memory, which we expect to be used across the majority of 2022's gaming laptops. Alder Lake also does support DDR4. The 12700H ends up 37% faster than the 11800H in this workload, as well as 36% faster than the Ryzen 7 5800H. So if you have a lot of compiling work to be done on the go, the 12700H is clearly superior to previous generation products, and it's really not that close. At 75 watts, it moves even further ahead in this workload. The extra power shaved off 20 minutes from this compile time on the 12700H, which leaves previous generation parts in the dust. Another great example of Alder Lake shining particularly well at high power limits. MATLAB is a short burst workload that's sensitive to things like cache and memory. Intel was already the fastest in this benchmark with 11th gen, so 12th gen only pushes their lead further ahead. The 12700H clocks in 15% faster than the 11800H and delivers the first sub 1 second time in the chart, so that's an excellent outcome. Our Microsoft Excel test is another one that's run primarily in the CPU's 115 watt boost state, so 45 watts versus 75 watt numbers aren't relevant. Once again, Alder Lake crushes it here, delivering one of the highest performance gains we've seen. It's over 60% faster than the Core i7 11800H, and a lot of that comes down to cache and memory again. This is well and truly desktop level performance, basically matching the Ryzen 7 5800X. For basic tasks, think things like app loading or video conferencing and so on, the Core i7 12700H is a great option, and it's able to outperform the Ryzen 9 5900HX here, though only by a single-digit margin. Most laptops of today are fast enough for these sorts of workloads. When it comes to the PCMark applications test, which measures Microsoft Office performance, the Core i7 12700H is able to put up a decent lead on other mobile processors thanks to its excellent single-thread performance, and Office is mostly a lightly threaded workload. We're seeing a 15% performance improvement compared to the previous generation chips, which is a handy boost year on year. Next up is 7-zip compression. This workload loves the Alder Lake design and the architectural benefits it brings, including powerful P-cores. The 12700H dominates the 11800H with a 39% performance uplift, and we see similar margins to AMD processors like the Ryzen 7 5800H. It also ends up beating Apple's M1 Pro by 8%. However, the 12700H here is using over twice the power of the Apple processor. So while it's a performance victory, it's not really an efficiency victory by any means. Decompression has typically been a strong suit for AMD Ryzen processors. However, the Core i7-12700H holds its own here, slightly outperforming the Ryzen 9 5900HX. This is thanks to a 21% gain on the 11800H, very much closing that generational gap that existed in 2021. Acrobat PDF exporting benefits from improved single-thread performance on the P-cores, coming in 11% faster than the 11800H. This keeps Intel in the lead over AMD in this workload. However, both chips are still beaten by the Apple M1 Pro, which is surprisingly excellent in this test despite using emulation. The 12700H is an absolute beast in Adobe Photoshop. Combinations of higher lightly threaded performance, faster integrated graphics, faster memory, and better cache systems allows the 12700H to destroy the 11800H. It's 45% faster here, the second highest margin recorded between these parts after Excel. This gives Intel a dominant lead over AMD as well, 33% faster than the Ryzen 9 5900HX. So if you're a heavy Photoshop user, you'll want Alder Lake. On the other hand, Alder Lake doesn't outperform older processors at all in FL Studio. While the CPU still performs very well exporting a track and does utilize both P and E cores, I suspect the E cores are a bit of a hindrance here given the performance difference versus the P cores, and audio workloads are of course highly sensitive, so this could be an explanation for what we're seeing. In Adobe Premiere Pro, the Core i7-12700H is the fastest CPU that I've tested to date. The overall score puts both the RTX 3080 Ti and RTX 3070 Ti configurations above the Apple M1 Pro and well above previous generation processors. In particular, it dominates Ryzen, and while the GPU is also faster than previous configurations, it's still a very impressive result. Part of that comes down to the export score. The full performance available with these new laptop configurations is 25% faster than a previous generation configuration, comparing 12700H plus 3070 Ti to 11800H plus 3070. While the GPU might be playing a small role, the majority of this performance uplift is coming from the CPU, which as seen previously is much faster for encoding and multi-threaded workloads. The other thing I wanted to show here is the effects score, not as much of a dominant lead here, but when using effects in Premiere, the 12700H configuration are still going to be the best you can get right now. Another mixed CPU and GPU workload is Adobe After Effects, and yeah, the 12700H is a beast here, significantly outperforming previous generation setups. Again, we're looking at a 25% performance uplift compared to the 11800H and 5900HX systems using RTX 3070 graphics, which isn't unusual compared to previous charts, but it is a great result nonetheless. And the final compute workload to look at is Agisoft Metashape's photogrammetry benchmark, where Alder Lake is again the chart-topping configuration. Previous gains here aren't as strong as previous Adobe Suite tests, for example, but we're still seeing at least a 10% performance gain over the next best configuration tested, which is a respectable result. Before we look at some game benchmarks, here's the CPU power scaling results. The Alder Lake Core i7-12700H shows much the same power scaling behavior as the Core i7-11800H, which is probably due to both parts using a similar family of process technology. The Tiger Lake 11800H was built using 10nm SuperFin, while Alder Lake was 10nm Enhanced SuperFin before it was renamed to the Intel 7 process node. Clearly, Intel 7 in conjunction with the new architecture is a lot more efficient, but it has the same characteristics of scaling very well into higher power levels. When compared to AMD processors like the 5900HX and 5800H, the 12700H is more efficient at lower power levels to a small to moderate degree, but this margin grows substantially around 65 watts and 75 watts where Ryzen begins to taper off. So while the 12700H is still faster at all power levels, it's especially good in the upper range where the biggest, beefiest laptops will be able to run. Then compared to the Apple M1 Pro, well, the 12700H is similar in its performance per watt for multi-thread workloads. Where Intel benefits though is the ability to scale much higher than the M1 Pro, so again in those larger gaming laptops the multi-thread performance far outstrips what Apple can provide, and this is seen in some of the 75 watt benchmarks shown previously. When it comes to actual power draw from the wall, when our x86 CPUs are limited to 45 watts, the 12700H has among the highest actual power usage, a few watts higher than the 11800H. Intel also raised default boost power limits this generation, which is why peak power consumption is also higher with the 12700H. This doesn't paint a favorable efficiency picture versus the M1 in burst workloads like 7-zip, where the M1 can keep up with the 12700H at less than half the power. Part of that comes down to what we see in this next chart, which is single thread power usage using the P cores. The 12700H is decently faster than the M1 Pro, but it does so at 3 times the power usage. This suggests the 12700H at 4.7 GHz is running well outside the efficiency window to achieve the absolute fastest performance. It would have been interesting to see where this chip would have landed had the single core clock been capped to say 4 GHz or less, but of course Intel didn't do that. And a quick note here, we don't show battery life numbers for CPUs we test because it's highly OEM dependent and can be dictated by the battery size, power configurations, and other system components, which are all at the mercy of the laptop vendors themselves. If you want to see detailed battery life stats, check out other channels that go in depth on each laptop, such as Jared's Tech. Next up, we have game performance, which is complicated by the fact that this new generation of laptops using Alder Lake also uses different GPUs, the new TI models from Nvidia. So this section won't be very long or comprehensive, as it's hard to separate the gains from the CPU versus gains from the GPU, especially as you'll often be GPU limited when gaming on a laptop, which kind of makes CPU performance in games a bit irrelevant. But we do have a few mostly CPU limited benchmarks to check out, so we'll start with Resident Evil 2. As best as we can gather from this title, which is CPU limited to some degree using these settings, the Core i7-12700H and Ryzen 9 5900HX perform similarly when paired with a powerful laptop GPU. The 12700H does appear to be faster than prior Intel CPUs, but to what degree is hard to say given GPU differences. For this generation, we've altered our CSGO benchmark to use pro-level gameplay, which is more representative of actually playing the game. This is a definitely CPU-bound title using the lower settings, and what we're seeing here is a decent performance uplift comparing the 12700H with the 11800H, a 20% increase to average frame rates. That's right in line with previous productivity results in single-thread and to some degree multi-thread as well. Rainbow Six Siege running using medium settings is also highly CPU-bound. Here the 12700H is capable of big performance gains compared to prior generation parts, especially for 1% lows, which are well up on older models. Specifically comparing the 12700H to 11800H, we're seeing a 25% jump in average FPS, though a smaller 6% increase on the highly clocked 11980HK. The performance lead on Ryzen is also in the 25% range. Hitman 3's Dartmoor benchmark is very demanding on the CPU, and the 12700H here has a clear lead on other processors, again up around the 25% mark compared to the best Ryzen result and even higher on past Intel models. However, for the most part, your typical laptop benchmark charts are going to look like this. Even though we're benchmarking Gears 5 on medium settings, the game is still relatively GPU bound, so the gains we see here are not attributable to the CPU, but instead to differences in the GPU. So it's nice to talk about whether the 12700H is faster than other CPUs for laptop gaming, but the reality is that unless you're playing competitive games on low quality settings, you're most likely to be majority GPU bound in today's games with laptop class graphics. Overall, the Core i7-12700H is a very impressive laptop processor that is set to bring a sizable performance upgrade to many mid-range and high-end laptops. The Core i7 line has been widely used across countless laptop models, but over the past few generations has somewhat lagged behind similar price or class Ryzen models, especially in multi-thread workloads. That's no longer the case. Intel has been able to do more than just close the performance gap. Instead, the 12700H is truly a class-leading processor in all areas of performance. Compared directly to Intel's previous Core i7 model, the 11800H, we're looking at 20 to 30% higher performance at the default 45 watt power level in productivity apps, and 30 to 40% better performance in the higher 75 watt power configuration that some OEMs use. That's a big generational leap that's been achieved through the new hybrid architecture with more processing cores, the upgraded Intel 7 process node, and other features like DDR5 memory. This is one of the most impressive generational leaps in performance we've seen from Intel for some time in the laptop space. With this big leap in the bag, the 12700H is anywhere from slightly faster to significantly faster than AMD's Ryzen 5000 lineup, especially if OEMs boost the power up to a high level, where Intel scales particularly well and is able to crush parts like the 5800H. This lead stretches from multi-thread performance through to strong results in single thread and even gaming as well, so it's a really nicely rounded package. I just don't see why you'd buy a laptop with 11th gen or Ryzen 5000 CPUs inside anymore unless you're getting a decent discount. The Core i7-12700H is stamping its foot down as the clear best available option. While these results are definitely excellent, these comparisons are mostly pitting Alder Lake against older architectures. Throughout most of 2022, Intel will be competing with AMD's Ryzen 6000 line, not Ryzen 5000, and we're expecting to get hands-on time with those new laptops soon. So I'd want to wait at least until we see how AMD stacks up before buying a new laptop. Based on what AMD is saying, I don't necessarily expect Ryzen 6000 to beat Alder Lake, but I don't know for sure where the performance or especially the value equation will lie. We also don't have a firm grasp on laptop pricing just yet, although we're expecting 12700H models to be similarly priced or just slightly more expensive than previous 11800H laptops, which would make the 12700H a good deal pending discounts on last gen designs. There's not a lot of weaknesses here to bring up, to be honest. The toughest battle is between the 12700H and Apple's M1 Pro, but in many instances the 12700H is faster, especially at higher power levels, and even has the capability to be similar in terms of sustained performance per watt. Where Alder Lake seems to struggle is in power consumption for single thread and burst workloads, where the M1 is clearly more efficient, but that's down to Intel operating these parts well outside the efficiency window. I think the tools are here for Alder Lake to shine in low power laptop designs. It just needs an OEM to complement this with an efficiency optimized product with great tuning, rather than a brute force performance system like the majority of 8 series laptops, which target gaming, use high power discrete GPUs and so on. But overall, I've certainly been very impressed with my first look at Alder Lake laptop products, and I think the Core i7-12700H is going to be one of those products to look out for if you're considering upgrading your laptop in 2022, and I've been very impressed with the generation on generation gains over Tiger Lake. If you're interested in supporting our independent laptop testing, we have Floatplane and Patreon pages. Links are in the description below for those. You'll gain access to things like our monthly live streams, Discord chat, what else have we got? Behind the scenes videos, lots of great stuff over there. And of course, you will be supporting Hardware Unboxed directly. Big shout out as well to XMG and Uniwil for sending over the laptops we use for testing in this video. Check them out in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.